Hello. Hi, my name is Kim McConnell, and today we're going to talk about my cultural biographical assessment project. Let's see if we can make sure you can see it all. The concept of this was to look at the cultural background of my life as far as the origins and the ethnicity that I was raised in. And throughout the project, I also was led to be immersed into a different culture and experience new ethnic situations. And so this program is going to cover, or this lesson is going to cover that event and all the things that took place through there. So first, let's go back and let me introduce myself. This is a look back, a cultural impact in the making. So just a real quick synopsis of my life. I was a very poor child. We lived in the woods. We were isolated. We lived in a small community. We didn't have much. We still had well water. We had a wringer washer. We put the clothes out on the line. We always considered it was part of a Southern tradition, but reality is that we were Native American. There was Cajun. We had all sorts of ethnic qualities about it, but it just really felt like country to us. The next nearest town with a population of 8,000 seemed like a city. So it was a small community with very few people, but we did have one church, I'm sorry. The other church wasn't technically in our community. It was down the road. So we gardened for a living. We hunted game. We also hunted game not only for food, but for pelt in the winter because we hauled pulpwood and did logging. And so there were a lot of seasonal delays and no paycheck. So you had to make ends meet. And that was one of the ways. Also, we would make cabinets and furniture in the winter. My stepdad taught me how to run a lathe, but anyway, that's beyond this project at this moment. But anyway, my grandparents were very set in their ways, very opinionated, and we all lived in one little area. I wouldn't call it a compound, but because there was a river that ran between the two houses and a few other houses on the property, but it was all family. So anyway, I didn't have a lot of other kids to play with. It was pretty much just me. And so I ran wild in the woods. From a very young age, I was the only child, so I was essentially my stepdad's son. There wasn't time for dolls and makeup and girl things. There was working on vehicles, cutting hay, inoculating the cattle, slaughtering pigs. I mean, just everything that comes with a woodsy background. So I was very much kind of a Tom Sawyerish girl. Actually, one thing I didn't add is I had 2 red-bone hound dogs that we raised from pups, and their names were Duke and Ann. Some people will get that, some will not. So anyway, through all that, let's move on to the influences of all that impacted my future. So the community that we went to was primarily Baptist in belief, and we went to a Baptist church. And so I was kind of the trouble child. I love music. I always want to tap and dance, and I always have a rhythm and a beat going. But the thing is at that time in that church, dancing was not allowed. Girls wore dresses. They didn't wear pants. Most of the time I was in pants. My grandparents were pretty strict about all those rules. But yet I was allowed to break some of them because I worked. Like I said, they kind of treated me like a boy. So it wasn't that bad, but Sunday everything went back into effect, and I had to actually have like a double life because on Sunday I had to try to follow the rules. So anyway, I go to school. I'm a good student. A few things happen throughout here. But the gist is that my first experience with sexism was in high school. My senior year, I was pregnant, and when we made the announcement at the school, the administration, no matter what my IQ was, my academic level, my achievements in extracurricular activity, because I was in several, softball, basketball, band, all those things, they wanted me to quit school. They felt like I was a bad influence on the other girls because you didn't come to school if you were pregnant and unwed. But I refused. I told them I would change the standard and that I was going to walk across that stage with my diploma and pregnant and show them that there was no reason that we couldn't do it. And I did do that. But that did have a big impact on me because it was then that I realized that there were rules outside of what I'd learned. Okay, sorry. I apologize. That was my watch going off. So I left. The exodus began. I left that small town. I left that community, and I've not gone back. I did go back a couple of times to visit the property because all of my family eventually moved away from it also. But I left it all behind. And I was really excited, but there was a lot to experience. One of my friends in high school, that's one of my dearest friends, she announced that she was a lesbian, and we are best friends still to this day. But I've had quite an interesting experience living that life with her and the things that she went through. But once again, I'm getting off track. I apologize. So my education and my career choices, once I left that town and left that community and left that behind, I became a paramedic. I did 2 years of Kamishi Technology Center now, vocational training, and became a paramedic. And I worked in that field for a long time. I even taught classes through the VOTEC for other upcoming EMT basics and EMT intermediates. I did not teach paramedic class, but I found that even then there was still a belief that it was a man's world. And it wasn't a place for minorities, regardless of race, color, sex. It was a man's world. And through the years, I taught continuing education classes outside of the agency that I worked for, and began to explore extrication classes and met law enforcement officers, and was soon recruited to move into law enforcement. So I left my career with emergency medicine behind, and I began to attempt to go to the full-time Cleat Academy and become a police officer, which I did. I was the second woman in law enforcement here. I was the first female narcotics officer in our area. And I was the very first police officer that had exposed tattoos. Actually, when I worked at the first city agency that I worked for, the municipality had a rule that if you had any tattoos, you had to wear long sleeves if they were on your arms. So I was restricted to long sleeves for a while, but they changed that policy once one of the gentlemen got a tattoo. Then we could wear a short sleeve. Once again, there's another sense of sexism that I have experienced. But through that career and all that, I met so many people of so many different ethnic backgrounds and cultures: Native Americans, Cherokee, Choctaw, Seminole, Sioux, African Americans, Hispanics, Mexicans, Portuguese, just a wealth of color and experience through those fields of career choices, and learned a lot about some of the traditions, such as the medicine practices of the Native Americans. They don't agree with what we always did for emergency medicine, and you had to be respectful of that. But anyway, moving on. There came a time where the sexism in the law enforcement kind of had me in a bind where I was overlooked for promotion after promotion. Younger guys with less experience, less training, less certifications tended to move up and go beyond me. And with that being said, I got a good taste of sexism at all levels: in high school, in the education field, in the career field, and throughout. But I did not let it slow me down. And that is one thing that myself and my subject for the immersion part of this project had in common. So let's move on to the immersion. In the immersion section, we were challenged to find a ethnic group or a cultural situation where we could go and visit and find a person to interview. And I chose Victoria. I knew Victoria. She's an African American woman, but she likes to call herself a Black woman. She is proud of that term. And that was something we had to discuss because I was unsure how to address it. And so one thing I would suggest to anybody, if you're not sure what terminology to use, if you're discussing a person's race with them, ask them what they prefer. It worked out very well. So I went to church with Victoria. She was already there, and I arrived a little bit later. It was an all-black church. It was different than the faith I practice now, but that played really little consequence in this. But one thing I would say is when I got there, it was very uncomfortable. I felt out of place just walking through the doors, and I didn't think it was because of race. But when I realized that I felt like I was the only Caucasian in the room, then I had to look at the fact that I was possibly a blind racist, and it was race that was making me uncomfortable. Now, I'm also socially shy, so I'm always overwhelmed in a large group of strange people, but I usually can overcome it pretty quick. But this was a little different, and I have to admit that. But they greeted me very welcomely. They were warm. They shook my hands. They gave me hugs. They had smiles. They asked questions. It was just very pleasant. And when I thought I stood out because I wasn't dressed quite right, I don't really think I did. I think I fit in. I think they accepted me just as I was. But I had dressed down just a little bit. And when I got there, they were dressed up quite a bit. And so that was a very neat ethnic taste or touch that was in that service, because they were decked out. The women were in beautiful dresses and the men were in their patent leathers and their suits. Anyway, that all being said, and as I said, we'll move on to the part where I felt like I didn't belong. I definitely felt like a stranger and almost like an intruder, but I think that was all self-imposed. Like I said, they welcomed me, they accepted me. I didn't really notice any odd sideways stares or anything. I did not feel ostracized, like they excluded me from anything. They were very welcoming, and I know I've said that several times, but they made sure to include me in the greeting session of the church. And so my self-consciousness was probably all my own. I probably went somewhat unnoticed by a few, but it wasn't like I was the elephant in the room, and it was very nice. It made for my ability to submerge myself in their culture and listen to their conversations and kind of observe the way they handled their children, the way they handled each other. Everybody was very respectful in their speech. I noticed most of the children are yes ma'am, no sir. There was not any just yes or no. So it was a good opportunity to gain the knowledge that I was assigned to retrieve. So sorry. So, and let's move on. Like I said, Victoria said she is a proud Black woman. And let's talk about her for just a minute as we kind of compare our stories a little bit. She was a middle sibling. They also were not wealthy. She was, it wasn't a strange thing to have hand-me-downs or second-time worn clothing. She was, I believe, one of 7 children, and she was about in the middle. So she was raised in a household with working parents, and she had to help take care of the siblings. Her parents were kind of disciplinarian, but yet that trickled down from eldest to youngest, because that system was what kept the older siblings in charge of the youngers and for things to work. Again, they seemed very respectful, the family members that I met, and I did not meet all the siblings by any means, but they just very respectful, and it seemed like they really looked up to their parents. And that brought me to something that in child psychology we had covered, that discipline with warmth in the African American culture is most often a better process than disciplinary actions by Caucasian parents, because we do it not so much with warmth. And that came about after we wrote this lesson, so I just wanted to throw that in there. It was an interesting tidbit that fell along the wayside. So Victoria was in high school. She did complete. She was an average student. She said there was nothing special about it, mediocre. she had restrictions at home. They had expectations about dating, and so pretty much, I wouldn't say sheltered, but I would say protected, to make sure that she made it through high school and had an opportunity at a career. There was a little bit of racism in high school when she didn't fit the mold when she attempted to try out for cheer, but she said that didn't really affect her. It wasn't something she had planned on being a part of her future. It was something to do at the time. So Victoria's now grown and she's graduated, and so we're going to move on to the next slide, where her young adult life begins and discrimination and sexism begins to take place more obviously throughout her life. In her employment situations, she had worked at some places, preferably mixed in culture and ethnicity, but she didn't fit in. So, and that was in a hairdressing situation. She loved to be a stylist. So with that being said, she chose to strike out on her own rather than to sit in the situation she was in. And one thing that Victoria did mention is that she chose to be a hairstylist. Not, it was a choice. It was something she wanted to be. It wasn't a role that she chose because of gender and it's recognized. And like Rosenthal and Lowell said, stereotypes for African American women lean toward certain professions. There are a lot of professions that are considered women's professions, and then there are a lot that are separated that are for men. And that was one of the things. She just really wanted me to know that she didn't choose to be a hairstylist because it's what women did. It's what she enjoyed to do, and she made that choice. So she struck out on her own and found a place where she could purchase a building and make her own salon. However, in the process of trying to get loans from bankers, she also again faced some bias and some racism. They were hesitant to give a low-income high school graduate, Black female, a business loan for a business that they weren't sure would take off. And as I've noted there, Davis brings that up in her process, or her journal entry, that white women and women of color are almost invisible in the man's business world. Women should not be invisible, but Victoria felt like she was. But in the same defense of that, in the same movement as that, when she did finally get a loan, although she got a higher interest rate and they had to extend the length of the note to meet her financial ability, it wasn't long until she realized that her clientele were all also African American. But one of the things she did say is that's okay. It's all okay to be culture inclusive. She was seated in a community where that was the ethnicity. That was the clientele that was local. She is in an all Black community. So she didn't feel like that was a racist or it wasn't sexist. She cuts men's hair as well as women's. So, but through the issues with school, through the issues with the bankers, through the issues with the rules from her parents and feeling like maybe school and her life was a little strict until she was free, or had moved out, which she moved out well after high school. It wasn't right in the beginning. Played little impact on her. Racism and sexism did not change the way she lived, the way she believed, the practices of her family and her tradition, her culture. She loves every bit of it, and she was not going to let anything sway her. So, with that being said, we're going to start closing up at this point, and we're going to talk about a few things that Victoria gave me, and we kind of both agree on these when we compared where we came from, the things that had happened, the persistence that we had to achieve our goals. And the thing is that things are getting better out there. Women, people of color, minorities, ethnicities, more and more are moving up in the workforce, moving out of just the labor force. There are professionals, there are CEOs, there are all sorts of people. However, there still need to be more. It's still unequal balance of men over women and minorities, but there has been process. And so one of the things that me and Victoria both agree is that resilience and persistence are the key to achievement. If you let the people who judge you because of the color of your skin or because your gender is not theirs, then you can stay down in this world. But there is no reason. Fight for what you believe in. Resilience and persistence will get you where you need to go. Yes, you may have to fight for it. You may have to take a few licks and may have to get over some comments and actions that were hurtful, but you can still succeed in that. Those are the cultural barriers and the ethnic issues that we both believe that can be overcome. And with that, I'd like to conclude my lesson and my discussion over my cultural biographical assessment project. And I want to say thank you very much for listening. It was a joy to do it, and I learned a lot. Thank you.